If there is one thing that I cherish in Ben 10, it's all the iconic stories that have been told throughout the franchise. Who can forget when Ben had his first encounter with Vilgax and learned about the plumbers? Or when Ben gained access to Master Control for the first time and fought both Kevin and Vilgax teaming up in the Null Void? Gwen learning about her Anodite powers and Alien Force? And that time Ben fought a guy who could control dolphins? Or when the Alien Force trio fought an evil soda machine. Okay, so some of those weren't actually in the show, but could you blame someone if they thought they were? I mean, this is the same series where Ben gets pregnant and has 14 alien babies. Those last two stories that I mentioned as examples were actually from Ben 10 books. These books, often from things such as the Cartoon Network Action Pack series or Scholastic books, contained very interesting stories to say the least. While some of them were very interesting, there was also some that were very bizarre and odd. Despite being obsessed with the Ben 10 series basically my whole life, I actually never really bothered with most of the books. In fact, I've only read 2 ever, which I will point out when we get to them. So I randomly had the fun idea of making a video where I basically talk about a bunch of the books that I never read or knew about, and basically give my thoughts on some of them, and just point out some things I thought were pretty interesting or funny. Now there is a whole bunch of these books to talk about, so I won't mention every single one, but I will try to talk about a good majority of them. I also want to point out very quickly that I'll be using the Ben 10 wiki when it comes to actually supplying pictures of these books for this video. So in some cases, I won't be able to talk about the entirety of certain stories. To start things off, let's talk about some of the common traits that all these books have in common. Before even going into certain stories, there are 2 main things I want to bring up that basically generalizes my opinion on all these books, at least from a basic standpoint. The first thing is that all of these stories are non-canon. Because of this, even if some of these stories kinda suck, they're harmless at worst. The other aspect is the art of these books. To start off with something positive, I think that some of the art in these books are actually pretty cool. The still frames of things such as Ben transforming into aliens is honestly really cool, and I love how we get some that are just straight from the show, but also some that are original to the books themselves. The covers of a lot of these books also look really cool. I kinda wish these were like posters you could get somewhere. These are really sick. However, not all reference to art is good. A lot of the times, these Ben 10 books would reuse poses of different characters' artworks, and it's pretty lazy, especially when it's very well-known artworks of these aliens. I figured I'd just mention that now since I don't want to go over the art of every single book individually, because most of my opinions I just shared basically go for all these stories. The last thing I want to say before we actually talk about these stories is that I'm not going to go in order from classic to Omniverse. I'm just going to talk about them as I see fit, and I'm going to try to save the really weird ones for later on. I also wanted to mention just things about these books that I find either interesting or niche enough that I thought it was worth pointing out. So let's start with something really simple that you would expect from something like Ben 10 and discuss the alien data files. The Alien Data Files were short stories that talked about the original 10 aliens with the exception of Grey Matter and Ghost Freak. These stories would talk about the aliens' biggest strengths as well as their biggest weaknesses and give you a short little lesson on how each of the aliens worked. I like the little explanation being that Grandpa Max takes him to like his old plumber base so Grandpa Max can help Ben learn about his aliens. I think that's pretty cool. It kinda would have been cool if we saw this actually in the show at some point during season 2. To start off with the writing, it's not anything super groundbreaking, but I really like the interactions between Ben or Gwen. These feel like they feel right at home with the show. There's also a lot of neat art here, but also some very funny visuals. To start off with some errors, one thing I noticed immediately is an Accelerates data file where Gwen's hair is just all fucked up. Why does girl look like she's afraid to fight the IRS? But as far as non-error based visuals, I really love seeing the aliens deal with their weaknesses. For example, we just see Ripjaw's just dying in the middle of a desert for no reason other than he's just there, like someone just spawned him in like he's spawning in Minecraft or something. The one they show for Diamond Head kind of reminds me of like those fast impact frames you would see in a fight like in Kill la Kill, which by the way, I watched for the first time not too long ago, and I'll just say this, Satsuki is peak character. The one for Accelerate kind of confuses me, because have we ever seen him actually get bothered by electric based attacks before? Don't get me wrong, I don't see it as a problem as a weakness, it's just that I don't think we ever see that unless I'm just mistaken somehow. There was that moment in Monster Weather where he gets electrocuted and you see a skeleton and everything, but I feel like almost any alien would have gotten fucked by that anyway. Some of them are kind of funny too. For example, Wildma isn't like in this rubber room with speakers torturing him for some reason. You got Upgrade here melting like the Wicked Witch of the West. We also get Heat Blast being tortured in a fucking car wash. Like, how the fuck did he get in this situation? But I think my absolute favorite is Stinkfly just getting tortured by a dude with a hose. Like, what did Stinkfly do to get this guy so mad. The power visuals are also pretty cool. Seeing Ripjaws or Stinkfly use their tail for combat, or Stinkfly using his mouth goo, which I wish he used more, was also pretty cool. And also, while it's not the canon design for the planets, seeing some of the planets of these species is pretty cool. I like the swamp type of look they give Stinkfly's planet. Although seeing Diamond Head's planet being a regular sphere instead of like the cylindrical like crystal that we see in the show is very cursed. We would also see some stuff that would eventually be incorporated into the show's canon. For example, we would see Ripjaws' planet being made up almost entirely of water, and the Galvin Bee being made up of the liquid skin that Upgrade is made of. As short as these stories are, they're still pretty cool and they're neat fun little reads. But now it's time to start talking about the more odd stories we have for this video. The next story that we're going to talk about is actually one of the two Ben 10 books that I actually did read as a kid. This one is called Target Raft. This issue was actually sold alongside an Ultimized Raft and the 6/6 figure, so I actually did end up buying this at some point during my childhood. I remember thinking the story was okay, if not really short, but now that I'm older and I actually look at it, how the fuck did I not notice a lot of the weirdness of this story? The story isn't even written that badly, but there's a few things that I noticed immediately upon revisiting this one. The first thing I noticed is Swampfire. Why the fuck does he have a Swampfire mobile? Is this to like promote galactic racing? Because he just has this car out of nowhere. Maybe it's in a different story where it's explained, but otherwise I don't know why the fuck he just has this for no reason. The other is that the plot of this one is that the Luodin send Ben a distress signal. Who the fuck is that? That is not a Luodin. This looks like an alien race you would see on like fucking Duck Dodgers. Another thing I noticed also is that 6/6 just speaks perfect English here, so that kind of bothers me a little bit. Now as far as things I like about this story, for one, Swampfire actually uses like stretchy arms to fight. That is really cool. It gives me Wildvine vibes and I really fuck with it. If there's one thing I feel like these books all do great is how they portray Swampfire. He just looks so cool in every single book, honestly. I do like how the transformations look in this one, such as seeing Ben turning the Chromostone referencing the show, or seeing Chromostone go to Raph and how that would look. I don't mind when the art from the show is referenced directly as long as it looks good and doesn't feel like it was done out of laziness. All that really happens here though is Raph just beating up Jared for a second, so it's nothing really crazy, but I just found those weird errors very odd. Next up we have Barbershop Blues, and for some reason that title reminds me of a Turtles in Time level. The plot of this one is that Grandpa Max wants Ben to get a haircut and Ben doesn't really want to, and when they do arrive there they end up fighting an evil barber with a poodle. One thing I like right off the bat is that Ben tries to get out of getting a haircut by turning into Diamond Head. That seems like something a kid would do with the Omnitrix, so I really do like that moment. But I have to ask, why the fuck is there just a random evil barber? Like, he just has business here cutting up like dogs' hairs and he just wants to kill people and he's just there and like no one questions anything? But I digress. One thing I really like about this is that Wildmutt actually does his spin dash here, something that he does in Ben 10 Battle Ready, but he never does this in the actual show. I suppose with Cannonbolt being a thing it'd be really redundant, but I kinda wish he did do that. Another thing that Wildmutt does here is shoot out his quills, though if you're a longtime Ben 10 fan, you should know that Wildmutt can't do this unless he's an adult Vulpamancer. I'm not sure if this was established back in Classic or not, maybe this is something that was known in UAF onward, but either way it's just odd seeing him do it here. As for this evil barber Luigi, there's not really much to say about him. He's just here for this story and that's it. One thing you'll know about a lot of these villains though that are like just generic people is that they feel very uninspired. I know these stories are supposed to be incredibly short, so they can't really have like a whole bunch of lore, but like they don't even give like a backstory or motive for why he wants to kill them. He's just like, you know what? Fuck this family in particular. If you're a fan of Wildmutt and seeing Wildmutt action with stuff that he normally doesn't do, I think you'll find some enjoyment from this little story. Now, as I mentioned before, these stories are from the Cartoon Network Action Pack series or Scholastic books, and while I wanted to talk more thoroughly about the Scholastic books, I couldn't really find any online. There were 3 I want to briefly talk about though. The first one being the other Ben 10 book I read during my childhood, which is Science Friction. I don't remember too much of this book, but I do remember Ultimate Echo Echo appearing, and for some reason having the ability to duplicate, which Ultimate Echo Echo shouldn't have. I also really wanted to talk about Chill for a Day. The idea of Ben being stuck as an alien in school is actually something I would have liked to see in the show. I'm not sure if it would actually be a good episode or not, but it would be interesting to see. It would be a nice way to see how Ben would be in his normal school life after becoming famous, which we don't really get to hear much of besides like a passing comment or two. This is one of the stories I was looking forward to learning about the most because seeing Ultimate Big Chill go to school is really funny, but unfortunately I couldn't find any pages of this book, only the cover. Right off the bat though, I already see an error in the fact that Gwen and Ben should not be going to the same school because that's not how it is in the show, but whatever, it's not a big deal. The last of the Scholastic books I wanted to mention was Double Negative. This is because I actually did see a picture of Albedo interacting with Ben's parents, and I'm pretty sure it's from this story. I really wish that Albedo actually interacted with Sandra and Carl during the show. That would have been so funny. To backtrack to the Classic series for a second, whenever the Classic series did any sort of silly or dumb stories, they were just silly and dumb just because of the premise more so than anything else. For example, there's a story where Ben gets beaten up by a bunch of mind-controlled weaponized dolphins. aliens. There's also a story where Ben fights an evil bullfighter. Now, that's not to say all the stories were about ridiculous premises. There's actually a few cute, charming ones I wanted to highlight real quick. The first one being Undertown Halloween for Omniverse. I really like this one because Ben basically explains the premise of Halloween to a bunch of aliens, and by the end of it, those aliens are dressed up as different things, such as Ben's aliens. The fact that Rook is dressed up as Grandpa Max is so great, I love that. There is also Star Chaser from Ultimate Alien. In this one, Ben thinks he's gonna fight a bad guy in an alleyway, but ends up finding a little girl who's a big fan and wants an autograph, and it's really cute how Ben interacts with her. Is it me, or does this girl look like Haley from American Dragon Jake Long? Another one from Ultimate Alien I really like is Fashion Victim. This is for a very dumb reason, but seeing Gwen, Kevin, and Charmcaster wear Ben's jacket is really cool to me. I don't know, they all look so good in it, I'm sorry. This one just has Ben's jacket becoming like a fashion statement, and then basically Charmcaster targets anyone wearing the jacket, so the premise itself is like whatever. Although I do want to point out, this book also has Ultimate Echo Echo duplicating, which, why the fuck did they do that? I understand that these books are probably for a quick cash grab, that's pretty obvious, but the fact that there's like little to no research done is crazy to me. It's not like one of those, oh, kids won't notice type of things, because trust me, any kid who watches the show in any capacity would know that Ultimate Echo Echo shouldn't be able to duplicate. Speaking of lack of research, let's talk about one of the most ridiculous Ultimate Alien comics to me, Remote Control. This story has Ben fighting off Driscoll, but there's one catch. Ben loses his Ultimatrix during the fight, and it's found by a dumpster diver who uses it to turn Ben into aliens from a distance. Do I need to explain how that makes zero sense? If you thought the big story was bad, where Ben becomes Swampfire just by touching Plant Ben using the Ultimatrix, this takes it to a whole different level. Not only that, but this is a common thing with all the Ultimate Alien comics, but Ben becomes an Ultimate Alien without becoming the base form first, and that really annoys me. Also, Gwen is easily able to trace the energy signature of the Ultimatrix despite it being technology, which, you know, a common thing about Gwen's powers is that she doesn't really trace technology that well. Also, look at the design of this dumpster diver. This dude looks like he belongs in like a Beavis and Butthead comic, not Ben 10. Now, someone might bring up the device used in Catfight in Omniverse that turns Ben into different aliens against his will. The difference there, though, is that this device was designed by the Galvins, and Ben still has his Omnitrix on him when he's turning into these aliens. It's not just off of him so he wouldn't have any way of transforming. This story just has a complete lack of understanding of how the Ultimatrix works, and it's just really ridiculous. But to give any credit to Ultimate Alien, they were consistent on making sure Ben was kind of an asshole. The next story I want to highlight is Beauty and the Ben. This story just has 7-7 attacking a beauty pageant Ben was invited to, but the only reason I'm highlighting this in terms of Ben's character is because Ben tries to impress some girls and makes a complete ass of himself, like nearly burning down a studio. Come on, Ben. But to give some credit, this scene of Ben turning into Swampfire is so fucking cool. Like, this is kind of like the ones you see in the show briefly in Alien Force, but even cooler. Holy look at this frame, it is so fucking good. I'm surprised that Julie isn't mentioned at all during this comic, but we'll get to Julie stuff in a minute. Also, I don't know what dazzling donkeys on ice is, but god, I want to see that. Ben and Julie's relationship is actually shown in a few of these comics, and they're not as bad as like some of the toxic stuff in Ultimate Alien, just by virtue of it being short non-canon stories. But there are two that I did want to talk about in particular, the first one being Tabloid Trouble. This one kind of has an interesting premise where basically Julie's upset about being seen on like a bunch of magazines given that Ben is a famous world superhero. She wants her relationship to be private, and that's valid. During the scuffle, Julie gets kidnapped by the goons from fucking Too Hot to Handle, which I find really fucking funny. Someone said, hey, remember these like bland villains from that one episode? Let's bring them back. Anyways, the two Bland to Care gang tell Ben that if he doesn't give them the Ultimatrix, then he's never going to see Julie again. So Ben devises a plan to give him a fake Ultimatrix, scares him with Armadillo, and the story ends with Ben and Julie happy again. This one's like, whatever, there's not really much to go over. I kind of like the idea of an episode where Julie would be upset of like their relationship not being private because of Ben's fame, but there's honestly not much of that, but that's probably for the better given Ultimate Alien's track record when it comes to writing Ben and Julie's relationship. I have a whole video about that, wink wink nudge nudge. The other Julie related story that I really want to talk about is Twosome, and this is the story that actually inspired the idea for me talking about these Ben 10 books in the first place. The story starts with Ben and Julie having a really nice day together, going to the movies, riding bike together. It's all really nice wholesome stuff. Then Alan of all characters comes in just randomly and says, wow, you guys are a really cute couple, you guys spend a lot of time together, and Ben basically questions if they do spend too much time together, which gets Julie upset. This all happens during a concert that Ben and Julie go to, and during this concert, Agrigor shows up. Of all the villains, just Agrigor. He probably took time out of his day trying to get the map of infinity pieces to be like, fuck it, I'm gonna fuck up this concert, and then Ben just happened to be there. Ben tries to turn into Ultimate Swampfire, who has a fucking hologram, so that's already, like, wow. Point is that he tries to go Ultimate Swampfire, but since he's so close to Julie and he gets hit by some sort of ray, the two of them fuse into Ultimate Swampfire. I am so curious on exactly, like, what was the thought process of this type of story, and why the fuck they didn't think this was this is, like, what? Where do I even begin with this? Like, look at them. They look like they're in a suit for an amusement park. Come down to the Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Park, where every ride is humongousaur. Okay, to give any sort of credit to how this could possibly happen, Egregore is trying to have a bunch of people, like, join and combine with him for I guess for energy, I don't fucking know. But that ray causes Ben and Julie to fuse, so fine, at least there's an explanation. But it's just so weird. In Ultimate Alien fashion, Ben and Julie argue for most of the story, and then when they finally defeat Egregore, they just make up like that, like nothing ever happened, so, you know, business as usual. But hey, give him some credit. At least we have a kiss that's debatably better than the Ultimate Alien finale kiss. Before I go into detail on some of the books that actually have some pretty interesting plots, I wanted to talk about just a few funny visuals I saw while actually reading through some of these books. For starters, in Ship Shape, Ship takes the form of a tank and runs over Chromostone in a pretty funny visual. There's this one frame of Ripjaws in Fear itself that reminds me of that Captain America comic meme. We have a hilarious error where Ben turns into classic Heat Blast despite being teenage Ben in Ultimate Alien. In Ben 10 on Ice, we get to see performers dressed up as Ben's aliens, which I think is really fun. And we have whatever the fuck this bullshit is in Fastlane. Now that isn't to say there aren't any cool visuals I want to point out as well. As I mentioned before, when Ben turns into an alien, they either reference art from the show or have their own original still frames of Ben turning into the alien that are pretty cool. I think that the classic series does a better job with this than UAF or Omniverse because the art is very detailed here. In the case of UAF, most of the time they're just referencing the show, which is fine enough because I don't think it looks lazy in most of these cases. And in the case of Omniverse, they either reference the show or they just do a quick change with a flash, which is fine, I guess, but, you know, it kind of sucks we don't get any detailed art, especially considering that Omniverse usually has some pretty cool quick changes. To give some criticisms, there are some errors I want to bring up, considering that you probably have noticed some I didn't bring up at all up until this point, so let me point out some that I found very noticeable. The first one I want to talk about involves Ghost Freak. In two separate comics, there is a reference to the episode The Last Laugh, where Ben saves Gwen from Zombozo as Ghost Freak. The one used in Ultimate Alien for the comic Christmas Clown is actually pretty good. However, the one for the comic Down in the Dumps for Omniverse, I'm not a big fan of. The art itself is pretty good, but look at Ghost Freak here and tell me if you notice any issues here. Okay, so besides the fact that 11-year-old Ghost Freak has chains, he has two eyes. I know that's such a nitpick, but like, how the fuck do you mess that up? The other major error, or errors I wanted to mention, was in one of the alternative covers for Fashion Victim. This art at first glance goes really hard, and it still does, but the errors are very laughable. Okay, so where do I even begin? Okay, so Ultimate Swampfire looks like he has the most tragic sunburn I've ever seen in my life. Swampfire's got a bit of a sunburn in the face too. And then the other error is somewhat of a nitpick, but for some reason, despite this being Ultimate Alien, we see classic Wildvine, Ditto, and Waybig. Wildvine and Ditto I could kinda understand considering that they're not actually in Ultimate Alien proper, but Waybig has been in Teen Ben's arsenal since the end of Season 2 of Alien Force, so where's the excuse there? Again, that's just a nitpick. This still goes hard, but these errors are kind of funny. On a more positive note, some of these covers are actually pretty damn good looking. There's even some panels that have full art with no speech bubbles that you can see on the wiki, and they all look really cool. One of my favorites is the cover for Twosome. The story may suck, but this raw as fuck art of Armadillo almost makes up for it. And for a comic called Ben 10 on Ice, Ultimate Big Chill did not need to go this hard. In fact, Ultimate Big Chill goes hard in general. He's like one of the best looking aliens in these comics. I'm not kidding. As far as some full panels I was able to find, most of them are of Ben turning into aliens, such as Big Chill into Ultimate Big Chill or Forearms, and they look really good. I know the modeling could be a little rough around the edges, but the overall art of the aliens are pretty damn good most of the time. Although in some cases, some of these covers don't make any sense to me, like, for example, for Lazy Day, where Ben just wants to have a lazy day, they just show Big Chill brooding like he's fucking Batman. Or in some cases, aliens on the cover don't appear in the story at all. For example, Armadillo in Twosome, he's not in the story at all. Or how for Beauty and the Ben, even though Swampfire and Big Chill appear, the cover has Ultimate Echo Echo. It's like, were they told, like, nothing about the story? Did they just tell them to put any alien they didn't give a fuck? Because that's probably what it was. Don't get me wrong, the art still looks good, it just confuses me, that's all. To wrap things up, there are only a few more stories I want to talk about that I thought were really interesting and had potential for more. To start things off, let's talk about what comes around. There isn't too much to talk about this story, but I really love the potential potential that this plot has. An alien comes to Earth to get revenge on Kevin, the reason being that Kevin sold weapons to his species' mortal enemies, and thus, as a result, his species ended up dying off, including his wife and children. This was before Kevin became a good guy and joined forces with Ben and Gwen, so it would have been really cool to see maybe Kevin reflect on his past and see all the mistakes he did. Now I know for a comic like this they're not going to go super dark or anything, but it still would have been really interesting if this was like an episode of the show. Then there's something like Ben Storm. This is kind of like one of those alien possession episodes but in a little comic, where Ben uses Brainstorm's personality to alter his intelligence. This ends up making Ben more of a dickhead than usual because of how Brainstorm normally behaves. I like when some of the aliens alters Ben's personality a little bit, so it was kind of interesting to see them do that in a comic for Brainstorm of all aliens. Before I talk about the final batch of stories that I found really interesting, there were two things I did want to mention at some point, but I couldn't really fit them anywhere, so I said fuck it, I'll just fit it here. They're very brief, so I'll be as quick as I can. The first thing is the story going viral. I have really nothing negative to say about this story except for the ending. Basically, the premise of this story is that Ben gets embarrassed online after a failed fight with some sponge dragon thing, and basically he learns that the solution to his problem is defeating the enemy with water. So instead of going water hazard, he says, fuck it, I'm going ultimate spider monkey. Even in these comics, they ignore UAF water hazard. The other is Black Knight's flight. I have nothing really to say about the story itself. I just like that Ben becomes Buzzshock in this. Like, this panel alone made me wish we got UAF Buzzshock. As for the last batch of stories I wanted to talk about, they all have to do with the character Elena Validus. Elena is a character that I wish the show integrated more because I really love the concept of who she is, and I know this is like a hot take and I'll save this for like another video or something, but I think besides Julie, Elena is my favorite love interest for Ben. I am just a sucker for heroes and villains being into each other. What I really like about these last batch of stories, they actually show focus on Elena, a character who had so much potential. But before we properly talk about Elena, I do want to mention the story Old Friends, which actually shows Max and Victor, Elena's father, working together as partners in the Plumbers. I think that's really cool. As for our first story that properly shows Elena, we have Plumber's Kids. I like this story because it shows Ben and Elena as kids actually bonding together as friends, and then Elena reveals that she knows about like the Plumbers and Forearms and the Omnitrix and everything, and that's pretty cool. But the real fun stuff about Elena comes from Parallel Paradox. There's actually quite a bit I really like about this story, but also stuff that kinda confuses me. To start with the positive stuff, I like seeing flashbacks of Ben, Gwen, and Elena as kids, and even seeing Kid Elena use nanochip powers. That's actually really cool stuff, and they fight off Dr. Animo. I also want to bring attention to Snail real quick because he's my favorite alien, and they once again lazily used his 16-year-old design for 11-year-old Ben. That will never not bother me. Elena is detained for stealing technology in Undertown, and Ben kinda comes at her defense, which I actually really like. The two used to be good friends, and I like seeing Ben have some sort of emotional turmoil with knowing that she's doing something wrong, but also caring about her. There's a little flashback of Elena being framed for stealing her team's clothing, which sort of parallels with her present day, where Ben thinks about this story and knows that Elena has good in her, even if it doesn't seem like she does. So basically, after Ben recreated the universe's Alien X in the show, another Elena was made in Ben's image where she never had a criminal past, so there's like more than one Elena roaming around, which, you know, I could say how much that doesn't make sense, but Alien X can literally make up whatever the fuck he wants, so I'll let it slide. And while Ben does end up bonding with the new Elena, he still cares about his own Elena and wants the best for her. There is a lot of cool callbacks to things such as the Alien Swarm movie, The Perfect Girlfriend, and seeing Elena's design here being different from the actual show, I actually really like this one a lot more, but that's just me personally. Also, to go to Julie for a second, I actually really like her with the Grandpa Max eyes. I kinda wish she had that in the show, but I still love her Omniverse design anyway. Overall, this centered story around Elena, though confusing in some aspects, is actually really good. I actually legitimately like this, especially considering we didn't get any Omniverse Elena except for a shitty cameo in the Most Dangerous Game show. The ending is also kind of sad, where Paradox basically says both Elenas can't exist in the same timeline, so Ben would have to pick between either sending his own Elena to Limbo or the new good Elena. And of course, he can't choose either because it's fucked up. I really like the dialogue here talking about morals and chances for people to do good even when they make bad decisions. It's all really nice stuff. I would have loved to see an Omniverse episode centered around Elena. Not necessarily with this, but something similar to this would be kinda cool. As far as some other stuff that I do like, I think the art in this one is actually pretty good. There is some times where they do reuse art from the show, but there's also original frames of some of the aliens and characters that look really good. We also get to see what a hypothetical Cooper in Omniverse would look like during the present day, so that's kinda cool. Also, without any context, considering that Paradox is in a story, I thought this Splixon plumber was 11-year-old Ditto because he has an Omnitrix badge right on his head. Sadly, I couldn't find a lot of Omniverse stories to read, but I'm glad this is one of them. This one was really cool. So that's a whole bunch of Ben 10 books you may or may not have heard about. Overall, there's some pretty interesting stories or ideas, and also some that are quite ridiculous, but they're still pretty fun reads. Especially since we got love for aliens or characters who didn't get much appearances in the show, such as classic Blitzwolfer or Elena as I just mentioned. With the Ben 10 comic being announced, I can't wait to see how that turns out. We know little to nothing about it at the time of this recording, so there's a whole bunch of ideas. They could continue from the Prime continuity, have it be a reboot of some sort, maybe they'll focus on like alternate timelines and stuff, I don't know, but I'm very excited. I wish I could make a video talking about like my thoughts or predictions, but honestly, I don't know what to expect, and I'm just excited in general. I know it's not very interesting to say, but that's just how I feel at the moment. Was there any interesting or funny Ben 10 stories that I didn't talk about that you wanted me to talk about? If so, let me know down in the comments below. I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.